Power doesn't come from force. It begins in awareness. It's not something most people even notice, let alone claim. Day after day, they wake up, go through familiar routines, and lean toward comfort like it's a reward. Eventually, the world feels tighter, like it's closing in. But they can't explain why. Then there are others, the ones who move through life quietly, with a certain sharpness. They see what others miss, not because they shout the loudest, but because they watch and they learn. These are the kinds of people Machiavelli wrote for, not tyrants or manipulators, but those who are no longer willing to live with their power, buried beneath guilt or fear or the need for approval. His ideas weren't about cruelty. They were about awareness, about refusing to be used by a system designed to favor the loudest or the most compliant. This isn't a call to become hard or cold. It's about becoming conscious. Conscious of how people move, how systems work, and how influence happens. The difference between a victim and a leader begins with one thing: expectation. The world isn't built on fairness. It never has been. Some spend years wishing it were, believing kindness should always be returned, and that hard work should naturally lead to recognition. But the world doesn't reward effort on its own. It reacts to positioning. It bends to leverage. A leader understands this. Sometimes early in life. There's no resentment in that understanding, only clarity, while others complain about being taken advantage of. The leader sees what's really happening. Every emotional cue, every power shift, every unspoken rule. It doesn't require a grand stage or a title. What Machiavelli pointed to begins deep inside emotional discipline. The kind of self-control that keeps you from being led by outrage, shame, or panic. Because as long as you're reactive, someone else is holding the reins. This doesn't mean you turn off emotion or pretend to feel nothing. It means your emotions don't decide for you. If you're easily rattled, if guilt drives your decisions, if fear moves you faster than thought, you're not leading, you're reacting. And those who react too often become easy to direct, easy to use. Machiavelli warned about the dangers of being ruled by kindness alone. He wasn't saying mercy had no place. But when kindness becomes a weakness, when it opens the door for manipulation, it ceases to be noble. In today's language, that means being strategic without apology. It means not shrinking yourself to make others feel more comfortable. Society tends to celebrate victimhood in public, while rewarding strategic thinking behind the scenes. You're encouraged to be agreeable, to say yes, to please others as a sign of goodness. But that's often a performance, one that benefits those who won't return the favor. The game isn't played in public applause. It's played in the quiet, backstage decisions. And the ones who understand that don't ask if they're being liked. They ask if they're being effective. The crowd follows moods. A leader doesn't. A leader stays rooted in purpose, moving not because others demand it, but because the path is already clear. That path isn't imagined in fantasy. It's grounded in the real world, real constraints, real human nature. The strategist notices more than just behavior. They sense what drives it, the needs people hide, the admiration they seek, the fears they carry. Nothing about this is cynical, it's observational. It's the quiet understanding that people often don't act out of logic, but from pressure, incentives, and desire. Machiavelli didn't teach that people are bad. He taught that people are predictable. Those who wait for goodness to guide the world often find themselves betrayed. Not because everyone is cruel, but because most are ruled by self-interest. And if you recognize that, you can create conditions where what's right also becomes what's easiest. Influence isn't always about force. Sometimes it's about removing resistance, shaping behavior without having to demand it. That's not manipulation in the way most people think of it. It's a kind of architecture, building systems where things fall into place, not through deception, but through design. But design takes clarity, and clarity doesn't grow in noise. There's a reason Machiavelli never said, "Be cold." What he said was far more valuable: be ready. If you rely on the goodwill of others, your position is already fragile. Not because goodwill is rare, but because it's inconsistent. Being prepared doesn't make you paranoid. It makes you steady. That steadiness is what others feel when they fall apart and look for someone who isn't. Someone who doesn't flinch when the pressure rises. That person isn't reacting in panic. They've seen the patterns before. They're already thinking 2 or 3 moves ahead. The leader sees life differently, not as something that owes them comfort or validation, but as a landscape filled with small negotiations, signals, shifts, meaning in every response. They know that every move speaks even silence, and sometimes silence says the most. Machiavelli's idea that it's better to be feared than loved has been misunderstood. He didn't mean fear in the sense of violence or cruelty. He meant respect, the kind that comes from predictability, from standards, from not bending every time someone else wants you to. There's a calm in that kind of leadership, not a need to shout or demand, just a quiet presence that commands attention. Because the leader doesn't need external permission to be powerful. Power doesn't come from titles or consensus. It comes from competence, from control. And here's the paradox: those who learn to control themselves rarely feel the need to control others. Their presence alone does the work. They don't rely on pressure. They become the steady center in a world of instability. They don't confuse being nice with being trustworthy. They don't assume people will always act in good faith. Instead, they understand what motivates people, and they work within those currents, sometimes against, but always with intention. The victim fights against the world. The leader shapes it. And that shaping doesn't come from force. It comes from knowing how the pieces move and where to stand when the time is right. Leadership rarely arrives with comfort. It doesn't come gift-wrapped in applause or in moments where everyone agrees with you. It arrives when things fall apart, when tension builds, when blame circles the room, and most people step back. That's when real leadership is revealed. Not because someone wants the spotlight, but because they've become the kind of person who can hold it without being burned. Machiavelli understood that leading often means standing alone. It means absorbing pressure instead of deflecting it. It means being watched closely, criticized often, and still choosing not to flinch. Not because you're made of stone, but because you've learned not to be pulled in by noise. Some are drawn to leadership for the wrong reasons, for validation, for recognition. But those who last, who actually shape the world around them, they're the ones who don't need to be seen all the time. They operate in silence, watching how people move, learning what systems reward, and positioning themselves with precision. There's no need to declare power. When it's real, others feel it without being told. And yet, none of this means the victim is weak. Not inherently. Most of the time, they're simply uninformed. They've followed the guidance given to them by a world that often celebrates the wrong qualities. They've been told that being agreeable earns safety, that self-sacrifice earns respect, and that being modest about your power makes you good. But what many learn too late is that those rules often leave you tired, overlooked, and bitter. When you realize this, the answer isn't to swing in the other direction to become cold or closed off. The answer is to change how you play. Not to abandon goodness, but to stop offering it to those who don't return it. Not to become manipulative, but to understand how influence works and use it with intention. This is the quiet transformation, from reacting to shaping, from explaining yourself to observing silently. And when that shift begins, people notice. Not because you've gotten louder, but because you've stopped chasing. Machiavelli's teachings weren't a rejection of morality. They were a mirror held up to human nature. A reminder that most people are motivated not by virtue, but by what benefits them. A leader who understands this doesn't resent it, they work with it. They don't hope people will change. They create environments where the right actions become the most rewarding ones. This is why so many fall short. They expect others to act fairly out of principle, to do what's right just because it's right. But when things get difficult, principles often take a back seat to pressure. People default to their instincts, their incentives, their fears. The leader doesn't complain about this, they plan for it. They anticipate it. They shape their systems around it. And that's where the true power lies. Not in control, but in design. When someone understands how people make decisions, when they know what signals carry meaning, when they see the chain reaction hidden behind a single choice, they don't need to dominate. Their presence creates alignment. Their clarity calms chaos. Others follow, not because they're forced to, but because they recognize stability when they see it. It's not about becoming feared in the way most imagine. It's about becoming someone whose actions are consistent, whose standards don't bend depending on who's watching, and whose silence carries more weight than another's noise. People respect that. And respect, unlike affection, is less likely to vanish in times of conflict. The leader doesn't speak to gain favor. They speak when the moment matters. When they speak, it's final not because they demand obedience, but because they've built a reputation for decisiveness. There's no need to repeat themselves, no need to raise their voice. Power isn't in motion, it's in presence. It's easy to believe that to lead, one must constantly react, that every insult deserves a reply, that every challenge must be met head-on. But the strongest move is often restraint, the patience to let things play out, to let others show who they are before you reveal your next step. That kind of patience isn't passivity, it's control. Machiavelli knew that most people lose not because they're incapable, but because they act too quickly, speak too soon, or move too loudly. Their emotions leak into their choices. Their need for validation betrays their focus. And in a world of constant distraction, silence becomes a kind of signal, a strength. Self-control, then, becomes more than a virtue. It becomes a weapon, a shield, a form of invisible influence. Those who carry themselves with composure often lead others without even speaking. It's not what they say, it's what they don't say that shifts the room. And this presence, this command, it doesn't come from ego. It comes from consistency, from having done the internal work when no one was watching. That's the part no one sees. The early mornings, the thoughts that never get spoken, the discipline to say no when yes would be easier. People sense when someone has earned their confidence, when their power isn't a performance, but a practiced state of being. This is what makes leadership feel different from performance. Most people perform in public, but unravel in silence. A leader reverses that. They build strength in private, so that public pressure doesn't shake them. That strength shows in the way they pause instead of lash out. in how they decide instead of react, in how they stay clear, even when surrounded by chaos. It's not about being emotionless. It's about being emotionally mastered. You can feel anger. You can feel fear. You just don't let those things pilot the ship. This is the subtle power Machiavelli described, the type that doesn't announce itself, but is impossible to ignore. When people test you, it's not always because they're trying to destroy you. Sometimes they're just trying to understand where your limits are. But the world doesn't hand out gold stars for emotional clarity. It watches, it waits, and then it pushes just a little, just enough to see what breaks. Machiavelli never said that was wrong. He said it was inevitable. If you walk into life expecting everyone to play fair, you're already behind. It's not that life is out to get you, it's that most people are trying to get something. The rules you assumed were universal, they're often just stories we tell ourselves to feel safe. The ones who rise don't wait for fairness. They move through the fog, and they do it with their eyes open. And it's not about being paranoid. It's about becoming clear. Because when you're clear, you're hard to manipulate. When you know exactly where you're headed, distractions are easier to spot. When you understand your value, praise loses its power. And when you accept your own limits, temptation stops being dangerous. That's what clarity does. It becomes a kind of armor, not the heavy kind you carry out of fear, but the kind that makes you light, fast, and impossible to shake. Most people never get there. They stay drowning in opinions, overwhelmed by the need to be seen, convinced that their worth depends on being constantly visible. But those who lead truly lead make time for stillness, not because they like silence, but because that's where the blueprint comes into focus. The influence you see on the surface is always built in the hours no one watches. You can't improvise presence. You can't fake preparation. You either do the internal work or you spend your life performing without results. And here's the part. Many miss power. Real power is heavy. Everyone wants the crown. Few are willing to carry the weight. And if that weight lands on someone unprepared, it crushes them. Not because they weren't capable, but because they weren't ready. That's the reason so many people fail once they get what they thought they wanted. The title, the attention, the authority. Without the structure, it all collapses. Without the discipline, it all corrupts. So the ones who last, the ones who make it look easy, aren't lucky, they're trained. And that training begins before the world even knows their name. In a time where loudness gets attention, it's easy to mistake volume for strength. But real leadership often looks like restraint. The pause before speaking, the silence that follows chaos, the steady gaze when everyone else is looking for someone to follow. People don't follow noise, they follow clarity. And that clarity isn't just about being right. It's about remaining composed when right and wrong don't even matter. When what's needed is direction, presence, structure. Machiavelli wasn't interested in creating tyrants. He studied what made rulers last, what made them effective, what made them necessary. Because the most powerful leaders weren't feared out of cruelty. They were respected for their steadiness, their balance, their ability to reward loyalty and punish betrayal. Not emotionally, but decisively. The victim spends time convincing, pleading, hoping someone sees their potential. But the leader becomes undeniable, not because they demand obedience, but because they become the calm in the storm. The fixed point that others start to orbit. It doesn't happen by accident. It takes attention, study, a constant curiosity about what drives people and what holds systems together. It takes the willingness to listen deeply, to not just hear what someone says, but to understand why they said it. It means noticing the tension beneath the words, the insecurity behind the compliment, the silence that says more than anything else in the room. That's the work few are willing to do. Victims spend their energy avoiding responsibility, thinking it will keep them safe. But in truth, responsibility is what sharpens a person, what strengthens them. When you start owning your outcomes, your words, your presence, something changes. You stop waiting. You start choosing. And in that choice, you take back control. With control comes freedom. Not the kind that lets you do anything you want, but the kind that lets you build without compromise. And that's what Machiavelli saw so clearly. Those who rule well are rarely ruled by anything within themselves. They've taken time to meet their own chaos and learned how to manage it. That's what leadership really is. Not a moment, not a speech. It's a repetition, a pattern, a rhythm you build in private so that when it's needed, it's already there. In the quiet moments, when there's no one to impress and no applause to catch. The choice is yours. You either lean into distraction or you reinforce your discipline. You either justify weakness or you strengthen resolve. Not through force, but through clarity. The world won't always know what you're doing. It won't always celebrate your restraint. But it doesn't need to. Because what matters isn't the noise outside, it's the weight of who you're becoming inside. It's easy to act like you have it all together when everyone's watching. But when the room is empty, when no one's there to applaud or judge, that's where the truth shows up. That's where leadership is built. Not in public victories, but in private decisions, in the silence. When it would be easy to let yourself slip, to compromise, to wait for someone else to make the first move. Machiavelli didn't admire people who waited. He respected those who moved first, even when things were unclear, especially then. Because clarity isn't something you find, it's something you create. And most of the time, you don't get permission to lead. You just start leading. In a world full of hesitation, the one who acts with intention creates gravity. People notice, not because you're the loudest voice in the room, but because you're the only one who knows exactly why you're speaking. That kind of certainty doesn't come from arrogance. It comes from alignment. While the victim replays conversations in their head, doubting every step, the leader reflects only long enough to learn, then moves forward, always forward. There's no time to dwell in regret, no use in shrinking from rejection. The moment you pause too long, momentum fades, and with it, so does your authority, first over others, then over yourself. That's what separates the practiced from the performative. Discipline that runs quietly beneath the surface. It's not flashy. It's not always visible. Sometimes it looks like waking up early, even when no one's counting. Sometimes it's holding a hard boundary. Sometimes it's saying no when yes would feel easier for a moment. Comfort is the place where leadership dies. It lures you with softness, tells you to rest, to take it easy, to play it safe. But real influence, the kind that lasts, isn't built there. It's built in resistance. In the moments where doing the right thing doesn't feel good, where nobody's cheering, where the reward comes much later, if at all. That's the trade most won't make. They want leadership without the solitude, impact without the scrutiny, power without the preparation. But Machiavelli knew better. He understood that if your foundation is shallow, the first storm will break you. And storms always come. So he warned, don't chase love from the crowd, because the crowd changes. One day they celebrate you, the next they tear you down. If your confidence depends on applause, then silence will feel like death. But if your direction comes from within, the noise doesn't matter. That's why true leaders aren't desperate to be loved. They're focused on being effective. The mission matters more than approval. And when the mission is clear, everything else starts to fall away. The opinions, the distractions, the need to explain. Intent becomes structure. Structure becomes momentum. And that momentum, built day by day, carries you even when motivation disappears. Victims hope, they wait, they dream of luck. But leaders prepare. They build systems that work, even when they don't feel like showing up. They make discipline easier by designing it into their environment. They cut out the noise, not because they're cold, but because they understand how fragile focus can be. Where your attention goes, your energy follows. And scattered attention leads to scattered results. Leaders protect their focus like it's survival because it is. They don't try to do everything. They don't aim to please everyone. That's not cruelty, it's clarity. Because if you spread yourself too thin, you lose the very power that made you worth following in the first place. That's why saying no matters. Not as a rejection, but as a signal. A signal that you know what deserves your time and what doesn't. That you won't be pulled into every argument, every drama, every demand for attention. There's strength in that kind of silence. The kind that doesn't need to defend itself. The kind that doesn't rush to explain. The kind that just holds. Victims often fill silence with noise. Leaders let the silence speak for them because they're not afraid of it. They've already made peace with themselves. And that kind of self-trust, real, steady, unshakable, is something others can feel, even if they don't understand it. That's what makes it powerful. It's not about intimidating others. It's about becoming undeniable, not through force, but through presence. Machiavelli knew that people who are insecure become threats to any leader, not always openly, sometimes subtly. Jealousy disguised as advice, undermining masked as concern. So a wise leader doesn't confront every challenge directly. Sometimes they redirect, they reposition, they disarm quietly, giving just enough recognition to calm the threat without losing command. Strategy beats confrontation every time. Power doesn't always look like action. Often, it looks like grace. The way someone moves through pressure without panic. The way they remain still while others rush. Victims think in moments. Leaders think in movements. Not just what's happening now, but what it means for what comes next. That long view, that ability to think in sequences, is what creates the illusion of calm. But it's not an illusion. It's built through patience, through observation, through refusing to waste energy on things that don't lead anywhere. It's not magic, it's not genius, it's mindset, and it's practice every day, in how you interpret setbacks, in how you respond to disrespect, in what you allow to matter. Victims take everything personally. Leaders filter, they study, they spot patterns, they adjust faster, and because of that, they rise faster. The only real difference between someone still stuck in reaction and someone who leads with strategy is how long they're willing to stay in discomfort. That's it. Can you hold the line when no one praises you? Can you stay kind when no one notices? Can you stay focused when no one pushes you? If the answer is yes, then you're already on the path. Leadership doesn't arrive all at once. It grows quietly in the background, stacking small decisions, forming habits that no one sees. Until one day, people notice, but by then, you don't need their approval. You're already moving. This isn't about pretending to be something new. It's about remembering what you were before the world told you to play small, to play nice, to be afraid. The world needs people willing to carry the weight. But before you lead others, you have to lead yourself. away from the habits that keep you reactive, away from the cycles that keep you emotional and drained. That's the first win. And once that's in place, the others follow. Leadership doesn't ask for things to be easier. It asks for more focus, more refinement, more intention. Most people burn out chasing fairness. Leaders use that same energy to sharpen their tools. The world is difficult. Then you become stronger, not meaner, not colder, but sharper, more aware, better prepared. Machiavelli never told leaders to stop feeling. He told them to stop being ruled by feelings. There's a difference, a big one. Every day, you get opportunities to lead, in how you handle delay, in how you speak when no one's listening, in how you treat those who can't offer you anything in return. Those small moments, they build your identity. And identity shapes your path. Victims wait for opportunity. Leaders build readiness. Influence isn't something you demand, it's something you earn. Quietly, repeatedly, without needing applause. And in a noisy world, that kind of presence becomes impossible to ignore. You don't have to dominate a room, just understand it. Read it. Move with intention. Speak last. And when you do, make it count. That's what Machiavelli really offered. Not a blueprint for cruelty, but a lens for clarity. For seeing the world as it is, not as we wish it were. Once you see that clearly, the game changes. And the only question left is, are you being moved? Or are you making moves? Machiavelli didn't write for the average. He wrote for those willing to think deeper, act smarter, and carry the weight of vision. Power doesn't wait. It gets earned. And it starts the moment you stop asking and start moving.